are now going to try to redeem a movie. We're going to put our gimmick to the test, where we drink every time we say something negative about the film. We're going to put it to the test with Drop Dead Fred, 1991. A young woman finds her already unstable life rocked by the presence of a rambunctious imaginary friend from childhood. So just to remind you, imaginary friend. And I also will remind you, a young woman. This is a fully grown woman who is married to a much older man than her. I don't know if after seeing the movie you actually believe that they were married, but apparently they, according to the story, they're married. And so there's a lot of flashbacks to when they're younger and she sees the childhood imaginary friend, and then when she's older and that imaginary friend, who is played by comedian Rick Mayall. The leading lady here is Phoebe Cates. And a huge shout out to the vice president, the senator turned, I guess, second vice president on West Wing. And, come on now, Princess Leia herself, Carrie Fisher, who did not know what she signed up for. We have
and rewrote most of her dialogue.
As she should have. You guys. All right, so let's do something about this segment. So we're a positive film criticism podcast here. That's what we are. So why don't we start positive and say, Dave, why did you recommend this movie?
I just want to say, what is this even doing in this section? Fuck you guys. Like
Get the fuck out of here.
Like, no, I have a soft spot for this one because I like grew up with The Young Ones. It's a British comedy show. Rick Mayall was a star of it, and this was Rick Mayall's attempt to crack the American market. And so he bought the same madcat comedy that he does on The Young Ones and that he does in his stand-up, and he brought it across and he applied it to this character, and he came out exactly as Rick Mayall does. And the world was just not ready for it. America was not ready for it at all. They didn't get it. It was like 3 years before Jim Carrey had even done anything like this. And I feel like it was just too much. But I mean, in saying that, this movie was incredibly successful.
Was it really? Yeah. What did it earn?
So New Line intended to release the film with 150 prints and support it with a 1.5 million PR budget, which is a huge release for an indie film because this was originally produced as an indie film. They did a test release in 3 US cities, and it had such a response that they decided to release the film to over 900 prints and a 6.5 million PR budget. It sold to over 50 countries and was a #1 hit in Australia and New Zealand. So, I think the only reason this movie sucked is because it was here. I think.
Interesting. Okay, so you're saying the film itself doesn't suck. It only sucks because Americans suck.
No, it sucks because Americans have a different sense of humor too, and we're not ready for this to come at them.
So this film only sucks to Americans.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Like that. So that style of zany, slapstick,
ridiculous,
really
childish humor.
True. Yeah, it was really working in Australia, New Zealand, and Britain.
Yeah, I mean, in Australia and to a lesser extent New Zealand, you get a lot of British programming, and we get
Jeff. I've never been prouder to have claimed independence from from the Commonwealth of Britain than after seeing this movie. Holy dog shit, Dave! Oh my God, this movie is safely in my top 5 worst movies I've ever seen. No doubt about it. I don't feel bad at all for saying it. That was a very
leave that up there to your drink. It's staying there to your drink.
I'm going.
Now, to piggyback off what John says, I don't know if it's in my 5 worst films I've ever seen. I do know that I didn't necessarily. Dave is just chugging his beer.
I think he was frozen.
I think he was frozen, but it looked like he was just like, oh, these fucking co-hosts. I tried to give a good suggestion for this gimmicky fucking show.
No, the camera didn't freeze.
There are some details in some moments that are really funny, and I think there's like a nice 3 minutes of sentimentality. When he gets hit by when Drop Dead Fred, who's an imaginary friend, gets hit by a fire truck, and all you see is the shoes stay on the ground somehow. His whole body just gets demolished, but his shoes stay on the ground in exactly the place. It's like a cartoon, and I guess that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
He literally pours a full bucket of paint on a grandma. Yellow paint poured on a grandma. Now, of course, you have to admit, over an hour of just doing like boogers and stuff, like it gets a little.
Okay,
you
that
have
is
to start asking yourself.
That is my one criticism. I feel like the zany
boogers?
stuff. No, just all the zany stuff. The boogers were cut out of the original release. They were put back in for the 25 year. So in the original,
that's what the film was missing.
Yeah,
that's what it was missing.
There you go. It's like Oliver Stone just worked his magic on this. But
it's basically the same movie.
Yeah, and no, but like at the beginning, you're right. The madcap stuff starts to get a touch repetitive, and you're like, okay, I'm over this now. But then he settles down and does some actual acting a little bit later.
Well, okay, let's talk about this, because there are a lot of television elements in this movie. So I'd be curious, and you would probably know better than me, Dave, what television was like abroad in the 90s. Because to me, this has cheesy elements like Seventh Heaven. It has zany elements like a Nickelodeon show, but told through adults. And Jim Carrey had even more class than this. So it's like, I can't quite... Okay, fine. But then it gets into... Here's a line. I wrote down a line. I'm paraphrasing this. But just as a reminder, this girl who is married, although if you watch the movie, she's only married on a TV show. She's not married in real life, right? Like, this doesn't make... I don't know how she's married to this guy. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I'm paraphrasing. Quote, I never should have let my mother know how much she can hurt me because she'd do it all the time. End quote. And then all of the stuff with the guy, this became a gaslighting movie. I'm watching The Queen's Gambit. She basically has to be on drugs because she's in an orphanage. They give the girls in the orphanage tranquilizers to sedate them, because once they realize their life is shittier than everybody else's, they act up and they go crazy. This movie, if it was a gaslighting parable, basically, of she needs this imaginary friend because if she faces her own reality, and then you can be as funny and zany and ridiculous as you want, because at the heart of it is truth. I think for the first 45 minutes there was no truth, and we were flailing a little bit, but that's just me. So I'm curious, Dave, how do you respond to that?
I feel like, no, you're right. There was very little truth in the first half of it. Was all Rick's introduction to America. And it probably wasn't handled the best it could have been for an American audience. For a British, an English, or an Australian audience, or a New Zealand audience, that was Rick Mayall. Like, we didn't need the introduction. Yeah. We knew what was coming the second she opened that box. Right. But yeah, it's hard because it's almost packaged. Like, when they first made this, the company that originally funded it took one look at it and tried to sell it to another studio, mainly because they were like, oh, we thought we were making a kids movie, and this is not a kids movie. Like,
yeah, who is this marketed to?
Well, that's the thing. I think they intended to make a kids movie, and then they ended up having to wrap it up as a black comedy. But it's a very psychological movie. I mean, there's a couple of messages in here. It's like you have to know yourself, and to find yourself, sometimes you have to look in the dark, naughty places. Is definitely one takeaway.
I feel like there was an enormous... I'm going to be as kind as I can. I'm going to try to speak constructively about this movie. I feel like there was an enormous obstacle that was missed until halfway through, when she finally went to the child psychiatrist, and got the pills. I feel like there was so much more comedy that could have erupted from her as an adult confronting her childhood best friend, that they just didn't even acknowledge. Even as funny as Carrie Fisher is in some of her moments, when she's just talking to her friend and acknowledging that Drop Dead Fred is here, and her friend Carrie Fisher, the friend of the lead protagonist, is trying to kind of play along with it. And she's like, oh God, this is terrible. You sunk my boat and stuff. I was like, where the fuck put this woman who is having a mental breakdown, the protagonist, into some kind of scenario where she's at least being considered truly crazy, and let Fred come out in terrible ways. I don't know. I mean, they did that in the restaurant. I feel like they were avoiding. Yeah, but I feel like they were avoiding that number one obstacle just so that Ricky Mail could do his shtick. So it was just, I don't know. I just felt like it just, I feel like from the get-go, I did not know why the fuck I was watching this movie. And then at the very end of it,
Jesus Christ. How do you not buzz that, Dave?
I'm waiting for him to finish his point.
At the very end of it, I felt like, I agree with you, Jeff, the very end of it, the movie clearly did have a message. And I don't understand why they didn't try to start facilitating our journey toward that message quicker. So that by the end of this movie, when they finally go into her dream house, which was kind of cool, kind of creepy, I felt like it was forced. I felt like it was like, all right, now we're here and they're going to make Fred for the very first time have to speak sincerely to her. And that, I felt like I was manipulated big time by that. They weren't giving me any breadcrumbs leading up to that moment. And that frustrated me. I was already not really enjoying it anyway because it's all a comedy, but just structurally, they didn't do themselves any favors. And they shoved that down my throat at the very end of it. And I felt like I was like, come on, 20 minutes, I'm supposed to digest all of it?
And I'll pace it back because again, there was some funny stuff in the comedy. Obviously, there was
sure. Carrie Fisher's funny, dude.
Going all the way back. So this movie opens with the mom reading a fairy tale to the daughter and then saying, "This is a bunch of shit." Opening credit. Okay, fine. That's not that.
Yes,
now that's
that
not new
girl
to new
was
audiences.
super cute.
Yeah,
that
she
girl
was great.
Adorable.
Okay. So then the first time we see adults. Oh my god, I can't remember what her name was. What was
Phoebe
Cates' name?
Phoebe Cates.
Anyway,
From
when we
Gremlins.
see her as an adult,
Elizabeth.
when we see her as an adult, she gets, again, very sitcom-y, but also very comedy movie. She gets robbed while she's at a payphone because her husband's leaving her. And then she goes to her job, which is a court stenographer, and she gets fired. So she has a terrible day, which is not entirely her fault. And we're sympathetic to her. And so she goes nuts and she's really freaking out. She's about to have a nervous breakdown. And so she sees her friend drop dead Fred. And then it's all about him. It's not about her. So this movie, back to what I was saying before about confronting patriarchy and gaslighting and all the things, the male comic doesn't come in to support her. And he could still do all of his things, but I never got the sense that he was doing it for her. He was doing it for himself.
I mean,
Dave, how do you respond to that?
Well, no, there's it's a case of
I
when
said something negative about a film that you're not buzzing, so I really appreciate how
no, that's
well
fine. That wasn't entirely negative. And
yes,
you had a good reason for it. Basically, the answer is Phoebe was there to play the straight man the whole way through.
It's her story.
But that's the thing. Like when you've got a character that rambunctious, to have someone pull it back that far and literally try to play entirely realistic against this ridiculousness, that's a lot of what comedy is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In a lot of cases in this, she gives phenomenal performances, like the restaurant one. The shopping mall scene with the violin was so fucking uncomfortable. My wife got up and left the room. It's just like, but there's like the scene in the restaurant. She's just where she's like you can see he's manipulating her, but of course there's no one there because no one else can see him. But the look on her face, this pained look of like, I'm really trying to hold this together. Please just accept what's going on. This is not my fault. Like there's some wonderful subtle performance there from her.
Right.
There is, but I agree with Jeff that it's like this movie thought it was going to rely on the gimmick, and it didn't realize that it needed a story to actually make a movie. You made the comment
until it
about,
did, and then it was almost too late.
Until it did, it was too late. You made the comment about Jim Carrey, and I totally understand. I love Jim Carrey, but I've always understood why some people struggle with him. Like I know what you mean, but his breakout performance was Ace Ventura. So if Ace Ventura was a vehicle for him to go nuts until he made 3 other movies where he really went nuts, I think Ace Ventura succeeded because there was a mystery at the center of it.
I was more thinking around the mask.
Well, nonetheless, there was still a story. So even though the mask is, it's fucking full of antics. But I feel like I feel like his best crazy performances, Liar Liar,
Liar, grounded.
Yeah, it's good. Or when they're grounded in a story. So I felt like I remember I just could not stop thinking when I was watching this movie. There is no way this guy went to the screening and thought, I'm going to have a career in America. After he saw it, there was no way he thought.
Yeah.
There's no way.
You know what I think the real problem is? The real problem in this movie is you have a British comic genius with an up-and-coming American actress being directed by the Dutch. There's no way this is going to work out. Get on board with your comedy, people.
Well, apparently they offered this to Robin Williams, and he turned it
Robin
down.
Williams
Yeah, he passed on it.
Self-respect. He did the Fisher King this
and
year.
they
He was
also
already headed in the right
and they
direction.
also offered they offered directing it to Tim Burton, and Tim Burton turned it down because it was too much like Beetlejuice. But if you want to go
really
down
tell from the production design of the secret creepy
Yeah, they
house
look
at the
exactly
end.
the
well,
same.
the front of the house, did that look familiar at all? Because
Yeah. What was that from?
they shopped it to New Line, which of course is the studio that was basically saved by
New
Freddy
Line.
Krueger.
Freddy Krueger. It looked like the house.
Oh,
And-
wow.
Freddy was finishing up with that, and a couple of like executives at New Line were thinking, okay, we've got this other quippy supernatural character, we can possibly turn this into a franchise. And I don't know whether they bought it simply because of that and didn't know, but like, yeah, it's just I give this a lot of leeway because of what I saw Rick do beforehand and the fact that I grew up with that style of comedy from him. But this was like, I don't know, it just didn't get there in its entirety. And I feel like if he'd pulled it back at the beginning, a little less Fred at the beginning,
I think it's
it might have
I
been
think
better.
it's the point of view. I think it's the point of view. I think if it was his movie, it would be one thing. But because it was her movie, I just never bought that anything he was doing. It was all get on board with me, woman. Or not, I don't mean to make it sound patriarchal necessarily,
Well,
but like
She was originally
he
going to
was-
be
I know
played by a
there's a- I know
British
there's-
actress.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just literally just talking about the point of view. The story is hers,
Mm.
and he's supposed to be there to support her. Straight man, crazy man, that kind of stuff is tangential. The point is, it's her movie, and his comedy was his own. And I never felt that connection between the two. Even there were a couple sentimental scenes we talked about.
Really?
Anyway,
Because the movie's not called Elizabeth.
And that's
then
why.
why then why is she the only one with the story? He doesn't. His story about whether
There's
what
actually
is his
there's a
story?
really good conversation.
What's it? He doesn't have a story.
There's a really good conversation that accompanies this movie, which is was he there at all, or is this whole thing her just having a psychotic
Of
break?
course he's not there at all, dude. Of course he's not fucking there at all. It's an imaginary friend. This is a movie about a schizophrenic.
So she just
This
had a
is-
psychotic break. Yeah.
Yeah, which again, I keep going back to that because like I feel like there was so much more that they could have unpacked if they had not tried to think of this as a comedy vehicle for a British comedian, and they would have actually leaned into the comedy of a woman having a psychotic break after what happened in that day. She lost her job.
Because
she lost her
psychotic
marriage,
breaks are
she
fucking
lost her-
hilarious.
Psychotic breaks can be hilarious when you treat them correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like they
What
ran
movie-
away from it at light speed.
I thought she was signing up for because I don't think it was this
I
necessarily.
don't know, dude.
but
She made When Harry Met Sally like 2 years before this. This was the lowest point in her career, right? Was this not?
This is where the wishful drinking was started. Is that what was that play called that you wrote? Wishful drinking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's- I think that's
Okay,
right,
we
yeah.
talked about this movie. Okay, so there's funny shit. Obviously, depending on your point of view, we disagree. We disagree. This movie is funny to one out of the three of us. That's pretty good.
Give
That's
me a
pretty good
one. I'm
odds.
gonna do it. We never do this, but I'm gonna pressure my co-host here to do this. Give me a 1 out of 10. What is this movie for you guys?
Oh, that's so beneath us. It's like a 4, 3, 4.
You're such a fucking liar. Yeah, you're a fucking liar.
I
It's
don't
not a
know.
four.
I don't
I'd give it
it's
a
lower
I'd give it
than
a
that.
5 or 6. It's not the best movie I've ever seen, but
5
I
or
enjoyed it
6.
as a kid. Yeah, and nostalgia is what
I
gets
just
me
want to
with
point
this
out.
one.
I want to point out the discrepancy. The IMDb rating is a 6.0, and the
Mhm.
tomato reading is 11%.
But the audience score is 77%. So what the fuck, man?
Yeah, I'll tell
They,
you.
they
Like,
had some stands.
I do have
Oh.
like my favorite joke in the entire film. I just want to get out before we wrap up. Is when they're on the boat and it's sinking, and he's out
Yeah.
the front, and he's come up the front, and she's looking. She's like, "What's that water doing there?" And he's like, "I don't know. What are your thoughts?" It's like my
That's good.
It's like
That's good.
it's like the
It's
one
like we speak
line.
the same
It's like
language.
yeah,
we
it's
speak
like
the same language, and it's lost in translation, Dave. I don't understand why that's funny, dude. I can't. I was sitting there. I was like, Dave thinks this movie is funny. I'm trying to get on board. It just. I was furious watching this. I'm sorry. Maybe
I'm gonna-
don't watch this movie. I'm sorry. Why is this on HBO Go
I'm
right now? Why did they
fighting-
make it till it is?
It's cheap. It was cheap. That's why it's cheap. I'm gonna fight for my movies
Jeff
from now on.
calls it
Okay,
too.
so next week, Dave, introduce what we're doing next week, and then let's go to sleep. What do you say? Let's do it.